So what is a twin flame? Okay, to begin with, twin flame is a concept. It's an idea that's been shaped by people's impressions, knowledge, sometimes wisdom, and by ignorance too, and that has also been tarnished by the matrix. In other words, those who don't really want us to grasp the depth of what twin flame comes to describe. I really have a problem with using the words twin flames because this concept is tainted with ideas which really distort what this thing really is about. So the word twin, I might accept. The word flame, to me, starts to sound a bit like a Hollywood romantic movie thing. And that's when the whole thing starts to lose its meaning and its power. Because the key idea around the so-called twin flame concept is that it is such a powerful experience, and not just for those two people involved. Even for some who understand this experience as something which goes well beyond the emotional relationship of two people, even then you can sense the underlying theme of romantic love more or less marked. And the whole idea in this twin thing is that it is anything but romantic love. In fact, it is about deconstructing your idea of romantic love, or better still, destroying it. I am aware of what I'm saying. It is really, when I was first confronted with the idea, it seemed the logical explanation, but it seemed really daunting and something that I really didn't want to do. Because we all feel comfortable when we think or when we feel that we are in love. But being in love is not a thing, it's not real. What do I mean by it not being real? Well, I mean that things that come from the ego, mind, are not real in as much they only belong in the realm of the ego. But as we know, we are not the ego. The ego is just a thing that really shouldn't be there, because it's the antithesis of our soul. And romantic love is a matrix creation to deviate us from our true nature and purpose. Romantic love is not a thing. So for as long as we keep tarnishing the so-called twin flame experience with ideas of romantic love, we're really diverting from its true purpose. Sometimes, well, that time, when the universe decides that it's time for you to realize who you really are, i.e. a soul incarnated in a human body, yes, but a soul, your soul governs your body, and the problem we have is that our ego governs our body and our emotions and our consciousness. When the universe decides it's time for you to go through this realization, you're going to have to admit to many things that you don't really want to admit, and you're going to have to do things that you don't really want to do. In other words, your ego doesn't want to do or doesn't want to admit, because the ego is quite comfortably sitting in your consciousness, and you're quite comfortable with that because that's all you've known. That's all we've known since we were born. So, twin flames, the dynamics between two people, at least one of them will be aware of the uniqueness of the situation. That dynamic is not reserved for twin flames. That dynamic governs all of our relationships. But in the case of twin flames, it is so powerful because of the very, very, very unbreakable strong bond, strong soul bond between these two individuals. But the dynamics themselves are not limited to twin flames. It's really sweet. For about 3 weeks now, I've been coming back to the idea that everything that you can establish as a universal law has a representation in all layers of soul existence. So, in other words, micro is like macro. So, yes, a twin flame connection, it's probably the clearest representation of human beings' relationship dynamics, because it's really powerful. But it is happening in all of your relationships. Even when you see or watch somebody without interacting with them, you saw them, you see them, talking on a YouTube video or on the radio, and your perception of them is governed by this very same dynamic. So all relationships are important, and it all comes down to cracking the solution to humans' turbulent relationships, because we can't ignore the fact that we tend not to get along. Of course, you'll get along with some people. There's a reason for that. But generally speaking, there's always somebody we dislike. We're always disliked by some people. And we'll always quarrel or argue with somebody. So at the root of that is this very same dynamic that applies to twin flames. And a spiritual awakening, a full-blown spiritual awakening, means that you have to understand that dynamic, see it for what it is, and break it, destroy it. So so-called twin flames can do that, but anyone can do that. Only that the pain in the twin flame connection is so deep and unbearable that you really have no choice. In other relationships, you just walk away and give it a few days or a few weeks, and you will have forgotten all about them. I've done that in my entire life. I've had relationships which were based on the same dynamics as the relationship I maintained with my so-called twin. And back then, it was really easy for me to detach and say, well, this is not working, bye. But I can't do it this time, really. I've tried. You can't escape it. The magnetism is too strong. The soul bond, because the soul just wants to be seen for what it really is. And that is going to bring rejection of your ego. In other words, rejection of who you think you are. Rejection of yourself, the way you see it. Of course, it's not. It's the opposite. It's embracing yourself who you really are, the one you don't know exists. So going back to the micro is macro, and I have to mention it, I really do. So one day, whilst on YouTube, these tarot channels popped up out of nowhere, and there was this lady called Rim. Her channel is called White Feather Tarot. So I watched this reading, and I was shocked because so much applied to my situation. And I have to say, Rim is such a lovely person, and she's quite special, and she's spot on. I mean, tarot readings are great. They really are. And anyway, I subscribed, and I was watching this video a couple of days ago. And she mentioned in this reading, I will find it and link it. She talked about how for somebody, or for a group of people whom she was channeling the reading for, the idea that micro is like macro, although she used different words anyway, will be key in their understanding of life. And I felt so identified, because this is exactly what I'm going through. It's something that I've always contemplated, but only now it's really beginning to become a big theme. Just as an aside, I've been drawn to sacred geometry because of some really uncanny things happening to me. And I was open and exploring this field. And then I mentioned it to my soul important person, aka twinflame. And they said, oh yeah, you mean like fractals? And that's crazy because fractals, I mean, I have to admit it, I really held a very vague idea of what a fractal was. And so I was like, yeah, I guess so. But in my mind, I didn't really, think it was the same thing. But you see, my soul activating person is always saying things which are key, which lead you on, really. Which always put you back on the right track, and you might not realize it straight away, but then you do some months later and you go like, yeah, they were right. As much disconnected as they are from themselves most of the time, their soul is there, and it really pushes through when they talk sometimes, and they give you little gems that then you can use. So anyway, Rim used the word fractals, and I went like, hold on a minute, there's something here. And then this led on this concept of micro is like macro, and so on and so on. So I really had to mention it because I knew that I was on the right track, and it's so important sometimes, you want to stop beating around the bush. So I'm really grateful to Rim for her skill, and really for accompanying me, because this is another aside, but maybe you can, I can share a little bit about myself. So I live alone with my dogs, and I live in a very remote place, and I deliberately don't see many people because I am going through what I am going through, and it's very intense. I'm always creating something, or reflecting, or going inwards, and it's okay. I love it, but sometimes, very occasionally, you feel a little bit lonely, and people like Rim, they really bring me comfort, and they're great company. So shout out to you, White Feather Tarot Channel, and thank you. So I kind of lost my train of thought there. Yeah, so the twin flame dynamics, same as any other relationship dynamic. And if we go back to my idea that the ego, mind, is a virus in our consciousness software, I've said it many times, but it really, to me, is the best and most fitting description for understanding and especially integration of the concept, so that it will become easier for you to start deconstructing your ego. So if it is a virus, or if it is something that shouldn't be there, and let me tell you why I don't think it should be there. One of the reasons is because we are light, we are magical forces. I mean, we embody what we have come to define as the good. It wouldn't make any sense for us to come into this world to suffer unless somebody else wanted us to suffer. You see, suffering, all the emotion, all the negative emotions we've grown so accustomed to, they are not part of our soul. Our soul is not that. It's nothing like that. Our soul is pure love frequency. So if in this world, the only world we know, we are in suffering, obviously somebody else had to decide that this was going to be so. And that somebody else, to me, I call the dark forces. And to me, this ego thing is a, inverted commas, implant, is an implant placed in our consciousness by the dark forces. And these forces are extremely clever. I mean, they are powerful. They don't have as much power as we do. Basically, if we let them. If we don't let them, they don't have any power. But if we let them, they do. And macro is like micro. In the large scale of things in the world, we have given them control. In our lives, sometimes we do. Some people more, some people less. But the world is controlled by them. And they have put such a clever little plan in place. Well, it's not really little. It's massive. And let me try and summarize this in what I didn't expect to be a long episode. We are at war. We are at war with one another because we have contradictory ways of understanding love. Okay? So, all of us humans, our ego is telling us that we are afraid of being abandoned. We carry this feeling of abandonment with us everywhere we go, all the time. It's part of who we think we are. So we feel abandoned, and we're looking for the opposite of abandonment. And in searching for it, we manifest fear. And how we manifest this fear of abandonment is how we relate to others. So, as I said, two different approaches, like yin and yang and day and night. Micro is like macro. Everything that happens in a small scale has a reflection in a bigger scale, in all of them. So part of us experience abandonment as something which, all of us experience abandonment as something which must be avoided, but we do it in different ways. When we feel connected to somebody and we begin to feel whole, although it's a false idea of wholeness, but anyway, that's our perception. And we cling onto it for dear life. Finally, we feel whole. And we cling onto it for dear life because we can't accept the idea that we might lose this connection. It becomes everything to us, so we'll do anything not to lose it. The other group can sense it too, but for them, abandonment is something that comes. They are not even going to try. They are not going to try to get into anything, to develop the connection, because they believe that once you are in that connection, it is going to break sooner or later. So they would rather avoid the relationship altogether. They anticipate the pain. So group A will go blindfolded into the relationship. They won't contemplate the fear of it not working, I guess. The fear of not having it is stronger. But for the other group, it's exactly the opposite. Everything is yin and yang, remember? So having it is the big monster. It's the elephant in the room, because if they have it, they're going to lose it, and the pain is going to remind them yet again that they are not whole. So in the world of the ego, yes, sooner or later the relationship is going to break. And, it will be painful, especially for the first group, when they realize that it's not going anywhere, that their views on love are incompatible. They will feel rejected. But usually the reaction is going to be, the first reaction is going to be, oh my God, how could you do this to me? How could you ghost me? How could you say these things after you told me you loved me? And that rejection is quite deep. But then after many repetitions of the same pattern, one day, the ego is going to go like, WTF, enough is enough. That's it, I'm done, bye. And they will walk away, feeling quite proud in most cases. At least that's what I've done. And you feel like that's it, you turn the page and you move on. That's what the ego does. For the other person, they will go like, oh, maybe I missed an opportunity. But again, it's just an ego thing. It's not real pure love. It's romantic love, which is not real. And they will just say, well, it's okay, pity, another one will come by. And that's it. That's usually the dynamic. But when the soul is involved, the whole game changes. This is a little flaw in the virus plan. Our soul has a plan B. Our soul has a way to direct us to understanding that this is what's happening to us at the moment, at the beginning. It's well, pretty much throughout the whole thing, is governed by the ego. And how does it do that? It does it by the force, the sheer force of the bond, the strength of the bond between these two people. Possibly because these two souls are in fact one soul, or they are blueprints of the same soul, or they are the same soul in two different reincarnations, who knows? I don't. I have an inclination, but I can't say anything with certainty. So the soul, my soul and their soul is poking at each other, like wakey, wakey. And they do that by creating the most unbearable pain. A pain so deep that you really have no choice but to look inside. You really have to look inside. And then you start to recognize why you react. You start to see your insecurities and your fears. In other words, you start to see your ego. The more you align with your soul and the less you do with your ego, the easier it's going to be for you to feel inside of you, in your body, when you're acting from the ego or from the soul. And here comes the really difficult thing. You will have to do things which, as seen by the ego mind, are cruel. And usually this is very conscious for the first group, which, as you might imagine, is what people call divine feminine. I don't like this term at all. So I will call it, for the time being, yin energy, which would correspond with the negative pole in a magnet. And so I've had to do things which I've never thought I could do, because the ego programmed me not to do any of that. I'm supposed to be understanding, loyal, good to the extreme. And this is another very interesting thing, and clever in the design of the virus plan thing, which is, yes, in essence, my soul, which is yin and yang, but which at the moment, it's more yin than yang, the so-called divine feminine, is essentially, it has these qualities. But what happens when the ego is at work is that they get grotesquely amplified. They become ridiculous in a way. Before you jump at my throat, it happens for them too, okay? For the so-called divine masculine. They are a distortion. And so in order to kill this distortion and leave us in the neutral frequency, as it were, we have to do things which don't align with the ego, things which would identify as cruel to them, And for them, they also apply cruelty in our relationship dynamics, but they do so unconsciously, pretty much like everything they do in this path, so-called journey. And so, this is one of the, when it first happens, the first trigger, and you go like, what have they just said? My goodness, that hurts so much. But that is the soul. It's the soul in this case, breaking through the ego, coming out and activating something in you to which you respond. And that's how it all plays out. And so, because everything is in its dynamic, in this dynamic is one and its opposite. When you do something which your ego doesn't really want to do, but is soul aligned, then you begin to understand this is going to be devastating for them, for their ego. And then they will begin to do things they don't want to do. They will begin to do things the ego doesn't want to do. And they will probably be shocked. And by those things, it's the opposite of what they've been doing when they were in the ego mind, okay? I hope I start to make sense here. It can be quite confusing, but in reality, it's very simple. So really, in short, it is a game of destroying the ego. And your counterpart is helping you destroy your ego, and you're doing the same for them. Only as long as we approach everything from the ego, we won't understand and we will feel hurt and we will be in the loop forever. But little by little, if you do the right thing, you will start to distance yourself from your ego, and then you will see it. You will see things for what they really are. And sometimes it still gets you. But really, there's nothing wrong with going like, wait a minute, I see the rules of the game. All these little things they've just told me, they mean nothing in the sense that they are a conversation of ego. They are an ego conversation. As in, they don't mean much because it's just a way, it's the way my soul and their soul has to break down our ego so that we can embody our true selves, our true magical selves. From here on, I'm really not sure exactly what happens because, let's say that they are my twin. Have I always been just half my soul? And by both of us aligning, there is a merge. Or my soul was half asleep and it just, comes into its wholeness. I can't tell. But this is what happens. You begin to embody more of your yang energy, or if you are in the yang group, the positive aspect of a magnet, then you will also begin to embody more of the yin aspect without the ego, without the distortion of the ego. So let me share something which happens at the beginning of our relationship. Like everybody who thinks they are a twin, the signs, the synchronicities, they are incredible. I mean, incredible. I could fill hours of recordings. I could record forever with all the little and not so little signs and synchronicities we've received. It's absolutely magical. It's so wonderful. And at the very beginning, let's see how I explain this without giving too much detail. A book I had read as a teenager in school came to mind out of the blue in one of our conversations in connection with something we were doing together. This book, by the way, is a book that you have to read as part of your schooling, and to me it has such an impact. I didn't know why, but I know it had more of an impact than any of my classmates. And it's a book that was always been on my shelf. I never reread it, but I always felt admiration for the writer, but like extreme admiration, Anyway, suddenly this pops in my head, and I just said, "Oh, this book just came into my mind," and they said, well, they knew it because they actually told me, "Okay, don't tell me, I think." And they said the title, they said the title contains 3 words, and one of the letters in blah, 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 blah word is that. I mean, everything was very accurate. This book, it's a grotesque depiction of a certain society and its culture. And the whole thing is described as though you are viewing it reflected on one of those concave or convex mirrors. That's the whole thing. It's like you project reality into one of those mirrors, and when you look into the mirror, then you see what's really happening. That is the ego. It's grotesque. Everything is interfered, is played in the wrong frequency or channel. So very early on, we were contemplating this very, very, very revealing aspect of things. It came in so early. It came on so early And at the time, I didn't really know what to do with it other than to apply it to things that were happening around us. But now I see it clearly. What a big sign and what a confirmation of everything that I've just explained. To me, it's mind-blowing that I can now see existence the way I do. And it's a game changer because it allows me to be in my full power. It will allow them to be in their full power. And thus other people will be in their full power. And that's when we become invincible. This is how big this is. That's when we become invincible, magical, powerful, and we can really change the world.